We ready? Good evening, everyone. I would now like to call the October 3rd, 2023 Longmont City Council regular session to order. The live stream of this meeting can be viewed at the city's YouTube channel, also at longmontpublicmedia.org/watch, or on Comcast channels 8 and 880. May we have a roll call, please, Crystal?
Sure. Mayor Peck,
Here.
Councilmember Hidalgo Faring. Here. Councilmember Martin. Here. Councilmember McCoy. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Here. Councilmember Waters. Councilmember Yarbrough. Here. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's stand for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to remind everyone that we are currently accepting applications for volunteer advisory board members. Applications will be accepted through Friday, October 13th. We're recruiting for the following boards: the Airport Advisory Board, the Historic Preservation Commission, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Planning and Zoning Commission, the Callahan House Board, Golf Course Advisory Board, Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, the Museum Advisory Board, the Board of Adjustments and Appeals, Master Board of Appeal, Senior Citizens Advisory Board, and Art in Public Places Commission. If you're interested and would like to apply or find out more, please call the City Clerk's office at 303-651-8649. So now on to our first call public invited to be heard. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes, and one person may not give or assign their time to others. Only Longmont residents and employees of the City of Longmont may speak during first call public invited to be heard. That's item number 8, and you must sign up on the list prior to the start of the meeting. Persons wishing to speak on a specific second reading or public hearing item, item number 10, are asked to add their name to the speaker list for the specific item prior to the start of the meeting. Anyone may speak, and no sign-up is required to speak during final call, public invited to be heard. So now we are going to move on since we have no minutes to approve. Do we have any agenda revisions, Crystal?
No, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So let's go on to the city manager's report.
Mayor, the one thing that I do have is I wanted to remind all of you that we have a 6 p.m. start to the next meeting for council, and so remind you and the public. And no comments after that.
Thank you.
No dinner.
Oh, I know that. I'm sorry. So now we're on to special reports and presentations, and we have a proclamation. It's a proclamation designating October 2023 as Community Planning Month in Longmont, Colorado. Whereas change is constant and affects all cities, towns, suburbs, counties, boroughs, townships, rural areas, and other places. And community planning and plans can help manage this change in a way that provides better choices for how people work and live. And whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in making choices that determine the future of their community. And whereas the full benefits of planning requires public officials and citizens who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation. And whereas the month of October is designated as National Community Planning Month throughout the United States of America and its territories, and the American Planning Association endorses this designation as an opportunity to highlight how planning is essential to recovery and how planners can lead communities to equitable, resilient, and long-lasting recovery. And whereas the celebration of National Community Planning Month gives us the opportunity to publicly recognize the participation and dedication of the members of planning commissions and other citizen planners who have contributed their time and expertise to the improvement of the city of Longmont. And whereas we recognize the many valuable contributions made by professional community and regional planners of Longmont, and extend our heartfelt thanks for the continued commitment to public service by these professionals. Now therefore, I, Joan Peck, Mayor, by virtue of the authority vested in me in the City Council of the City of Longmont, do hereby proclaim October 2023 as Community Planning Month in Longmont in conjunction with the celebration of National Community Planning Month. Thank you, and I see Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm also joined by our Planning Commission Chairman, Michael Pullen, alternate Jerry Boone, and outgoing Vice Chair, Josh Goldberg, who are going to join us in accepting the proclamation. I just want to assure you, we do have a real dedicated professional staff that I'm lucky to work with every day, providing community planning, but these are the folks that don't get a lot of thanks and put in a lot of hours on their own, away from their family. And I see Josh maybe even brought some of his family along for the trip. But it's been a tough year. I took a look at some of our numbers, and I think at this point, last year, we put in 12 more hours, or the Planning Commission has, hopefully making good recommendations and good decisions for the city of Longmont. So I won't go into that much longer because, as you mentioned, we are recruiting for a new member, so I don't want to scare anybody away. But I'll turn it over to any one of these folks if they have anything they would like to say, or.
I would just encourage people to volunteer.
You have to speak at the podium, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would just encourage the public. As I said, the applications are open through the 13th of October, I believe. I would just encourage the public to go ahead, and if you have any inkling, to go ahead and put in your application. I feel that it has been a very valuable thing in my life to be part of the commission. I've learned a lot about the city, and to me, it's a good way to be able to give back to the public, I guess, the thanks for being able to live in this city.
Thank you. Would you like a picture with your proclamation? Okay. We're now at first call public invited to be heard, and the first person on the list is Lance Whitaker. Remember to give your name and address, Lance.
No.
You know me better than that, Mayor.
I know.
Today's my day anyway, so. Today, my name is Lance Whitaker. I live at 1750 Collier Street, Longmont, Colorado. I've been a resident for over 40 years now. And today is National Techies Day, National Boyfriend Day, and National Take Fruit to Work Day. So as you can see, it's probably my favorite day. As I support fruit trees in parks, as you all know. You guys, like you said, you look to citizenship for, support and ideas to expand, and I think that's a great month to have. So thank you, Mayor and Council.
Diane Christ.
Thank you. I'm Diane Christ, 2034 Mount Sniffle Street in Longmont. I wanted to address the concerns that were, comments that were made at the council about concerns that citizens had in the newspaper about the council potentially raising taxes. And I want to say that I think there's a little perception on the part of citizens that the council is hired basically as administrators, and when the council comes through and says, here's what we need to do, it carries a little more weight than just let's put this on the ballot. And a lot of people don't really read all the verbiage on the initiatives. And I say this from experience because I've had this happen every January in my business where a client says to me, why did sales tax go up? And I'll say, well, remember, we voted on this. And they say, oh, yeah, I voted for that. I didn't realize it was going to raise taxes. So I'm just saying that when the council says, this is what we should do, it carries a little more weight with citizens. And also, if you're putting out flyers to encourage people to vote, which I know that's on the docket today for the county initiatives, it also says that we are in alignment with what that is proposing to do. I think right now it's a little tough for people who are just coming out of a pandemic, particularly business owners, to sign up for more taxes at this time. During those 2 years, there were people that thought, we're not even going to survive this. So, but we still haven't recovered fully. I think when you had an agricultural economy in town, it was easier to see that, if you don't plant something, nothing grows, you have nothing to eat. And it was also easy to see that if there was blight or something that affected the crops, you were going to have a poor year. And I think that really is a bit of the panic that's going on right now. So I want to encourage the council to be very circumspect about how they, particularly today, encourage people to vote one way or another. And just let people know this is a tax initiative. Keep that in mind. Weigh the pros and cons. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Strider?
Strider Benston, 951 17th Avenue. And I'd like to join with Lance. I don't know about the day, but this is Banned Books Week in the country. LeVar Burton is the head of it this year. And we've had more books banned in this country this year than ever before that we have any record or knowledge of. Several thousand books have been banned. And a small number of people are basically doing this, but minority rule, that is what the game is in this country, and we need to deal with that. Some of you know I've spent the last 60 years trying to build a democracy in this country, and we thought we were getting one 58 years ago, but it's been being dismantled. The former president, who owns one of the two political parties in this country, but he's about to lose his towers and all his New York businesses after a lifetime of fraudsterism, but he has secret bank accounts in China and places where he has more respect than he has for this country. The Chaos Party, they lost in shutting down the government this way. You know, the number one employment in government, aside from the military, is nurses. So they tried to make sure that nurses don't get any pay, or the military. And the former president called for the execution of his own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military. People do need to wake up, although in Florida they have a law that says stop woke. In other words, everybody be asleep. It's time we do wake up and pay attention to what's going on. And a person some of you have heard of, Adolf Hitler, called up his friend Goebbels in 1928 and said, "What policy should I do now?" Goebbels said, "No policy, chaos. Chaos is the best policy." That is exactly what that political party is following right now. And if we're going to save democracy, our country, and the planet, it's time to wake up. Thank you.
Thank you, Strider. Stan Toll?
Yeah, this is Stan Toll, 2001 Terry Street, Longmont. What I was going to briefly congratulate the city on actually putting the flashing lights on the pedestrian cross on Main Street. Now, that has been something that I've come and actually mentioned that's something that needed to be done a couple of times here. As far as traffic, I came in here and I talked about the concept of being woke. And woke is actually just being educated and aware. Now, usually they talk about racial inequalities and social justice on that. And with traffic, this is something that we should try to get ourselves educated and aware of different ways of doing things. And I was going to point out two YouTube channels, Not Just Bikes and Strong Towns. And there's one community that actually got rid of all their stoplights like they did in Holland, and they reduced their traffic deaths to almost nothing in a community about the same size as Longmont. And the reason there's the lights, and then we have something on Airport Boulevard that they're thinking about having some sort of pedestrian things. I would suggest that instead of having our police just try to determine who was at fault in accidents, to actually see if there's something in how the construction is that could prevent those accidents. And that's what the person with Not Just Bikes has mentioned, that's what they were doing in Holland. And just taking that direction, being aware and educated about it's not just the person making a mistake, it's actually how the infrastructure is made. And so we finally got out of the prejudice that cars should be king and put flashing lights on the pedestrian crossing. And personally, I've had a panel truck slow down next to me and not know why until I get to the, so that was pretty obvious. So we need to do that with the rest of our traffic.
Thank you, Stan. Steve Altshuler.
Good evening. Steve Altshuler, 1555 Taylor Drive. A couple weeks ago when I was here speaking, I talked about the increases, I may have used the word taxes, but basically in fees that are affecting so many of the businesses in Longmont. And then I guess at the end of the evening, there was some comment about things that I had said. And several of the council members were making a point of saying, there are no new taxes. We haven't raised any taxes. So what I want to point out is 6 or 8 months ago, I was here, and you had a presentation from, I believe it was Imagine Longmont. I may have the name wrong. Is a company that's helping Longmont bring new businesses into Longmont. And in their presentation, there was one slide where it showed that all the companies that they bring into Longmont are required to have DEI classes, diversity, equity, and inclusion classes for all their employees. We already have laws against no discrimination or against discrimination. So to me, the DEI classes are redundant. And if all the new businesses are forced to have these classes, you're probably talking about a cost of $2,500 to $25,000 per company, depending on the size of the company. And maybe there's annual updates, just like there are for COVID shots. Also, I know with real estate, you can have builders pay the city in lieu. It could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 that goes to the city coffers as opposed to just the cost of building. So that raises the mortgage, it raises the rent 6-7%. And yet technically there are no new taxes, just fees that are affecting businesses that are trying to do business in Longmont. So I just wanted to clarify that it doesn't have to be a tax that hinders businesses or that takes money away from businesses. There's a lot of other names for things that will take away, make it harder for a company to be successful. The other thing I want to talk about is Proposition HH. I mentioned this last week, but I think it's important for the city council to do things that are protective for the working people in Longmont. Proposition HH will raise our property taxes 37% instead of 40%. So for the average homeowner, they will save $80 or $90 a year, but eventually they're signing away all of their Tabor refunds. Last year, lots of people, couples, got $1,300. I will give you $100 any day of the week if you'll give me $1,300. So I think the city council should step up and say to the city of Longmont, this is not good for you financially. And the things that the state is writing is very deceptive. And again, I think it'd be good for the city to help protect the citizens from things that they may not know about. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Seeing no one else on the list, I'm going to call public invited to be heard. I'm going to close it. We are now on to the consent agenda and introduction and reading by title of first reading ordinances. Crystal, would you read the ordinances into the record?
Yes, Mayor. We have one resolution this evening. Item 9A is Resolution 2023-78, a resolution of the Longmont City Council urging Longmont citizens to vote yes on 2023 Boulder County ballot issues 1A regarding an open space tax extension, 1B regarding an affordable housing tax extension, and the Netherland EcoPass Public Improvement District extension on the November 7th statewide coordinated election ballot.
Do councilors want to pull this item? Anybody? I just want to say one thing on here. I want to make it clear that we are not raising taxes on these the first two ballot issues, resolutions. It is an extension of the tax that we are already paying. And the last one is about Netherland. We wouldn't be able to vote on that anyway, but I always think it's really important for local governments to support each other in what they're trying to do. So, Councilwoman Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I do want to make it clear, I'm going to vote for this because even though I may not vote for everything that I could vote on, I'm going to vote in favor of the housing tax extension for certain. And it is important for the city governments and the regional governments to support one another. So I'm going to vote for this resolution, but I do want to call out the fact that when they say we are extending the tax, it's not the same thing exactly as when Longmont extends its street tax, right? When Longmont extends its street tax, it was a street tax before, and it's a street tax after. And boy, this year we really found out, because we had weird weather, that everybody approves of the street tax and wants the streets to be fixed. These taxes are keeping the tax that you had, but using it for something else, as opposed to allowing the tax to sunset. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And otherwise, I'm ready to vote I see we have someone else waiting in the queue.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I am generally reticent to chime in on some of these things, but the extension of the open space tax, and specifically because I've read the opinion pieces talking about how it was derived and how they have extended it for the public safety issue that the county wanted to do in the last cycle and this cycle now, affordable housing. And to me, affordable housing is considerably an important issue. And so I will be supporting extending the tax again to help. We've seen it from the state level, from the governor to the state legislature down to each municipality as well as all the counties, that affordable housing is a true need in this state, not just in this state, generally all over the country, but in this state, definitely, especially along the Front Range, which we are part of. And so while it is not maybe the initial intent a couple cycles ago, I believe it's worth extending, and so I will be supporting. And it's rare for me to chime in on something like this, but thank you.
Councillor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I want to thank both our last two council members that were talking about these two issues. I agree with them. And so with that, I'd like to move the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. Councillor McCoy, do I have a second?
Second.
Councillor McCoy moved the consent agenda, which is comprised of Resolution R 2023-78. That was seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. Let's vote. Did you vote, Susie? Okay, so that passes 6-1 with Councillor Waters absent. So we're on to, there are no ordinances on second reading tonight, so we're at general business. The first thing on the agenda is the Attainable Housing Fee Waiver Program. And we have Molly O'Donnell.
At least put stuff down. No, just sit down. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That'd be great. I was looking for you, Tim.
Okay, Mayor and members of council, Molly O'Donnell, the Housing Director for the city. I wanted to start tonight just kind of explaining while we're here. The Attainable Housing Fee Waiver Program is something that we presented to you in concept back in April. And you gave us direction at that time to move forward with drafting an ordinance, and in doing so, continue to research a few of the key elements of the proposed program, and also to conduct stakeholder outreach. Here's a little summary of those key elements that we have been working on since April, and really getting as much information as we can. The other thing that you requested is that we look at the right-sizing the existing incentive programs to ensure that we tier the programs correctly. So once we have a final proposal, just see what the whole picture looks like. So in terms of our research efforts, we used our state grant-funded contract with Root Policy Research. That firm did the housing needs assessment and the inclusionary housing review work throughout the year, but presented back in July. And they did some comparable research for us for programs that are somewhat similar to what we were proposing across the nation. And really, we were informed by key elements of some of those programs, but overall, we know that none of them are trying to accomplish this exact same thing that this program is designed to accomplish, which is to provide a stepping stone to market and a pathway for especially first-time home buyers. And so the bottom line is we're charting new territory with this program, but do know that that research has informed this all the way through. We held stakeholder engagement sessions over the summer that brought together subject matter experts from developers, builders, the lending and real estate community, fair housing, legal experts, and housing advocates. And I'll just plug that you'll see a couple of graphics in here. That's from our newly designed housing website on the city website. So our communications team made these graphics for us, and they're just great. So there, you'll see those throughout. Just a plug. Okay, the problem that we're trying to solve. This is information that you heard from us back in July. It's just reiterating why we're here and what we're attempting to do in terms of helping. And so how can the city help? Well, supplying attainable housing is a complex problem that can't be solved by the city alone. It really requires solutions from the government, but in partnership with lenders, the real estate community, and even employers. The city has several tools in our realm of influence where we can affect change, and building permits are one of those tools in the toolbox. Building permit fees are a cost of development, so that can affect the eventual sales price of homes once they make it through the development process. While this program alone will not solve the issue, but we are trying to do all that we can to help solve this problem and urge private industry to do what they can as well within their spheres of influence. So here, we've got some overlay here, so I apologize about that. But this is just a reminder here on the table of what types of incomes we're looking at for household sizes in this attainable range of 80 to 120% area median income, or AMI. So the overall parameters of the program are still quite similar to what you saw back in April. It's for sale product only. The fee waivers would apply to the attainable units only, so not necessarily an entire development if it's mixed. The developers and builders must apply for waivers to meet minimum criteria, including demonstrating a financial need for the waiver, restricting the sales prices in accordance with our inclusionary housing sales price maximums, income qualifying buyers, requiring owner occupancy on those units, and then a written agreement with the city, and then for those larger projects receiving over 45% waiver, really that open bulk development model to make sure that we're putting the dollars where they need to be. The applicants would submit applications that are then reviewed by staff based on range criteria. And just to clarify that we're only talking about fee waivers at this point in time. We don't have a fee offset program that we currently have in the affordable housing program. That's not proposed quite yet. Then one implementation piece is that it limits the ability to change your election for how you're going to satisfy your inclusionary housing requirements, so that we don't have changes all the way to the end of the road. So here's the fee waiver scoring criteria that we referred to. I want you to notice that there's two sets of scores here. We have a new proposed score and a previous proposed score that you saw back in April. We ran through several scenarios, listened to stakeholder feedback, and this scoring on the left column of the two is where we are currently proposed, and that's just to make sure when you run those scenario projects that they still stack appropriately and get to the right levels, and don't get stuck at certain levels without being able to advance. You see on asterisk, there's one item that's been removed from this list, and that's scoring for deed restriction. We're going to get into the deed restriction here in a moment, but that has been removed as a scoring criteria for now.
Excuse me, Molly, do you want to take questions now or at the end?
Sure.
Okay, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I'm willing to hold my questions to the end. I was just getting in a queue. But since we've interrupted Molly, could you go back one slide? I would like to understand what a fee offset is as opposed to a fee waiver, because I don't really know the term.
So in the affordable housing program, you can, certain fees are eligible to be waived, and certain fees are only eligible to be waived if you request 100% waiver from council. And so those ones that aren't eligible for the typical fee waiver, the Affordable Housing Fund offsets them. So they're still paid to the source, utility, or whichever that fee is directed towards. That is paid on behalf of the developer by the Affordable Housing Fund.
Okay, thank you.
So we just don't have, the Attainable Housing Fund is new. We don't have the program built up yet to be able to accommodate both.
Thank you. And I would rather ask the other questions I have at the end, if it's okay with the mayor. Is that okay?
Well, of course.
So I will say on the fee offset, this is an important concept because when the enterprise funds put the fees in, when we have the percentage eligible that we had some comments on about what does that mean, it's important that the enterprise fund gets a tangible benefit based on putting the fees into it versus a fee offset. So this component's pretty important when we start moving through the other requirements.
And since we came back here, I'm going to add on a note on this slide rather than later on. So I just wanted to summarize some of our stakeholder feedback on the overall program. Really, the overall comments that we received is that the program as presented could be used to bolster underwriting for development projects. Generally, it's all about managing risk and the conditions put on developers by their underwriters, so more unknowns equals more risk. And the city should, this is the comment, city should explain further how the existing affordable, middle tier, and attainable fee waiver program could all work together. We will go into that when we talk about those right sizing, so we really did try and incorporate all of the key comments that we received. Okay, so going back up for a moment, I just want to note in here that the ranking is based on affordability, deepness of affordability as the primary point scorer, and then moving into some of our more flexible options, the preference for units designated for an employer investment, and we're going to get into that in a moment, preference for units that work for home buyers that own the units that work in Longmont or are moving to Longmont for a job, and then the exceptional benefit to the community in line with Envision goals. This is really that choose your own adventure path. We're going to jump into that in a quick moment, but this is kind of how everything prioritizes in this list. So on that, we did get feedback from the stakeholders requesting that there be more structure around the exceptional benefit category. The intent of this was always to be centered around Envision Longmont and the council priorities, but to keep it simple, we plan to include the Envision goals to provide some guidance around what would be considered valuable in this category, subject to council consideration of that. But we still want it to be the choose your own adventure category where you can really load up those bonus points essentially for being creative and unique and bringing that into your development. So we didn't want to overprescribe it by having a number of points per goal, but have enough flexibility, but also enough certainty to kind of walk the line and be balanced. So no changes have been made since April on the fee waiver scale in terms of the proposal for administrative approval versus council approval. And here's how those points stack up and what percentage of waiver that you could be eligible for. So digging into the three main categories on those scoring criteria that we've been researching, we've had a lot of discussion around the deed restrictions. Generally, the stakeholder feedback is that shorter terms are desired to minimize the risk of homes sitting on the market, which causes lenders to raise the risk profile and require greater return margins. And then 7 to 10 years was generally well received for those that were comfortable with any level of deed restriction. So I know that we've researched 7, 10, 15, and there are market comps out there at 30, but that really is not meeting the intent of the program. That's more permanent stability rather than stepping stone. We had feedback about the concern for homeowners' equity during market downturns. So some did express interest in appreciation minimums. However, when we researched that, that's really not in line with the intent of the program. This is something that's more appropriate for like an affordable homeownership program where that stability is the goal, and permanent housing security overall. But then this program, since it's intended to be a stepping stone to the market, there is inherently some risk built into that too. It's still a stepping stone of the risk, but there is some of that would be inherent in this program. Some desired to see some level of payback to public investment. And so we're going to kind of talk about that in a few moments with one of the options that we added for your consideration. Really, the way we describe the program is the intent of the program as designed was to produce the homes that contribute to our housing stock and then keep serving residents, but not necessarily to bring revenue back to the city. It was more on the creation side. So we will talk about that and how we played that into an option in a moment. There was some concern with deed restrictions not dropping off before reinvestment is required, but in response to that, we did some research with lenders, and that we confirmed that if the terms of the deed restriction align with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae rules, a home is still eligible for a HELOC to make major repairs as needed within that period. So that was a big one. There was a suggestion to consider a lien with a payback clause instead of a deed restriction. The idea of a lien to the buyer instead of a restriction on the home itself, developers liked it because that does kind of remove them from the equation. It's more on the buyer's side once the home is built and their risk is not affected. It was also brought up because originally there was a concern that the HELOC wasn't possible. We've since confirmed that that is possible. It's a common method for programs like down payment assistance that go directly to the buyer, but again, we're working on the back end of this. We really are incentivizing building the stock. And also, a lien helps one buyer, but doesn't necessarily roll along to help subsequent buyers, which we're trying to do. It impacts the debt-to-income ratio of the buyer. And then a deed restriction without an annual appreciation cap does not impact the creditworthiness of the buyer. The deed restriction aligns with the program's intention to balance building general wealth and then being able to graduate from the program. So really, after all of this consideration and heavy amount of feedback, we do think the deed restriction is the most suitable option to propose tonight. So here's the basics of what a deed restriction, the major terms that we would be discussing, which is really the length of time and then the resale options. So again, the way this program is designed, we want to balance wealth generation with using city investment to help as many people as possible. So we're trying to just use that balance check mark all the way through. We started thinking about dividing the program into two major areas. A large investment, when you reach that point where you are above that 45% waiver amount. This is proposed to come along with a rolling deed restriction. I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a moment, but the proposal is for 10 years, and the first buyer has a 10-year deed restriction. And if you sell with under 10 years, then that deed restriction starts over for the next buyer. And if you stay in it for 10 years, you can sell at market, and you got your generational wealth all the way up to the top level. So we'll show you a kind of a walkthrough of that in a moment. And then resale options, you would be limited to selling within the city's inclusionary housing maximum sales price within that 10-year term, and a buyout option with a 25% payback. This is that flexibility that we're considering. So I'm going to walk you through all of that. And then the other kind of half of the program is the small investment projects, where this is going for a smaller fee waiver amount, and really for the amount of return that the benefit that you get from the reduced fee, it really is not necessarily in line with a longer-term rolling deed restriction, because if we put too much of a deed restriction on a smaller investment project, then we might not get much uptake of that program because it's just too much of a trade-off. But we still want those smaller projects or smaller developers to be able to participate in some form. So that would be proposed to be a fixed-term deed restriction and resale options with a buyback, which I'm going to go into for you now. All right, so looking at that large investment, so the one's getting more than a 45% waiver. This is kind of an example of what that rolling 10-year lifespan would look like. So you could sell it 10 years, and then that home would exit the program, or you can sell it within our maximum sales price limits before the 10-year mark, and the program rolls over. And so what we're thinking of, it would roll over for 3 sales or 30 years, whichever comes first. Because really at that 30-year mark, you need other major investment, and a deed restriction after 30 years for this intent of a program doesn't really make sense. But this is our attempt to allow people flexibility, but also build wealth and help as many people as possible. So if you imagine a sample project of 100 attainable units, all that got benefits from this program, maybe a third of them would serve for 10 years and then exit the program, and in the next 10 years, another third would exit. So it's kind of extending the life of some of them, but also allowing off-ramps for a portion of it. For the resale options, this is kind of what we've talked about, where you can sell a market rate after 10 years, or sell within and roll into the program continuously. And so that's buyout option. This was specifically requested during our developer feedback process. It came about because there was a desire to build in as much flexibility as possible for homeowners, and then walk that line with the desire to have some payback of public investment. The payback proceeds, if this went forward, would go back to the Attainable Housing Fund as it's proposed. And really this is for those people that can't stay for 10 years for a specific purpose. Financial hardship, either personal or in an economic crisis. Job change requiring relocation, change of family status, family size, and other considerations. It is that off-ramp to protect against unforeseen circumstances.
So I'm going to jump in real quick. One of the things that we did, we dug into this with the affordable housing program when we rebuilt it, because what we found was that there were times, primarily in an economic crisis, where people couldn't sell the home to somebody who income qualified, and then they were forced into bankruptcy. One of the things that we were trying to figure out in the change of family status is, so you're in a home, you need it, all of a sudden you have an aging parent, the aging parent then has to move in with you, but you don't have enough room for that. This gives somebody the ability to buy out of it, but then they have to pay back 25% of the equity that's earned on that house. And so it gives some flexibility based on unknown conditions that can happen with someone.
We chose 25% for this proposal because if you see that example breakdown there of what could happen, we wanted it to be enough to be able to get out if you really need to, but also not so attractive that everyone would want to do it. That if you did stay in the program, you would get more benefit. So that seems like the right amount there. I'm going to pause for deed restriction questions overall. I'm going to get through the small investment if that's okay, because I know that this might be where we spend some time on questions. For that lower threshold type project, we're proposing a single 10-year term, and that is really to balance out what is that fee waiver worth to a developer in terms of the risk profile. If you sell within 10 years, the same buyout option is available as well. But you wouldn't necessarily be, the maximum sales prices wouldn't be applicable in this situation. So here's where I'd love to answer questions if you have any. How does 10 years feel? Do you like the rolling option? Do you like the single term option for that large and small kind of breaking point? And then the buyout option, we're specifically wondering what your thoughts are.
Okay, I want everybody to weigh in on this if you wouldn't mind. So Councilor Martin was the first one in the queue. So if you can keep your comments this round to 5 minutes, then the next one will be 3 minutes, so everybody gets a chance. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. A bunch of fees come due when a certificate of occupancy is issued. And that's, I think, when these fees would come due if they were not waived. Is that correct?
So the building permit fees, that would actually be a building permit. So that is ahead of certificate of occupancy.
Ah, okay. And then we have another fee, and I'm asking because, so a big fee that is going to experience some changes is the fee in lieu of bringing water rights. And I'm frankly confused about what the milestone is on that one too, but what I recently learned is that the water market is being disrupted and that fee is likely to go up within the next 6 months. So I'm looking for some understanding of how this fee waiver and that, we have some fee waivers or fee assistance associated with affordable housing. Are we considering that in this case, or is that going to be full boat?
So council does have the ability, and you all adopted some ordinance provisions that allows us to bring affordable and attainable projects to you all to make that decision. And you made the code change on that. We are looking, based on the feedback on this ordinance, of fine-tuning that once we get through this process, but there is a mechanism now to deal with it.
Okay, so I just basically wanted to make sure that that issue is not forgotten in all of this. Okay, great. The other one that I have is, these fees are there not because we like to enrich the city, but because it costs us money to connect new construction to the city services. And that's what these fees are supposed to cover. So whenever we look at reducing these fees, I'm always concerned that the math still works and that the city still has enough to maintain its infrastructure and pay for the things that are supposed to be paid for by these fees. Are we at some point, not necessarily now, but are we going to see the details of the math?
Yeah, it's kind of hard because you don't know who will participate in this and who won't participate in this, but I know that we've talked about, well, what is the overall impact on the financials and what can we absorb? I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch on an ongoing basis, and that can't be static. We have to evaluate as we're moving. I think when you look at those projects that are 45% and over, we're starting to dig in some of the details on this one. And what's really interesting is when you start looking at density and how that applies to the units and the amount of infrastructure that's put in and what's the ROI that you're actually getting on an ongoing basis, that number's changing. So Becky and I've had some conversations. When you look at a pretty dense environment, because that's what we're looking at in terms of the design review that we're putting in, you're limiting your linear feet of streets, your linear feet of water, wastewater, and so on and so forth. Does that create an operational cost? It does, but it's really a one-time cost for equipment. But comparing it in a conversation that we had, I took my street that I live on, and it's pretty dense. There's 8 homes. If you look at a more dense development, there may be 16. So you have 16 homes actually contributing to the revenue stream that may actually shift the ROI in a different direction. And so those are some things that we want to model, because every one of those are going to be paying, your base fees for your meters, your water, and so on and so forth. So we're going to definitely dig into that as we come back to council. And it's going to be something over time.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez,
I think,
aren't you 6?
yep, no, I thought somebody else had rung it. Oh, okay, very good. Thank you, Mayor Peck. So in this concept, we are talking about taxpayer subsidized properties in one way or another. Is that correct?
Or fee-based subsidies.
Or fee-based?
Yes.
Well, I mean, and that's really, that's where it comes to the substance to me for whether we deed restrict them or not, okay? When we're talking about taxpayer subsidized properties, I feel that it's absolutely necessary to deed restrict, right? And I remember in the conversation that we had, probably 2018, was that we heard from the real estate community that deed restricting in perpetuity was their preferred stance as far as the affordable housing concept of the conversation. But I feel that we're now getting into still affordable housing. We may call it attainable housing. But if we are taxpayer subsidizing these things, we should be looking at the same kinds of deed restriction. And so I'm not really thinking that the 10-year thing is okay to a certain circumstance as far as you need to hold it. I am not for the buyback. I'll just put it that way. Sorry, my computer is not working the way the other ones are. So I'm looking at other people's, the mayor's specifically.
They don't move.
Yeah. And I said this at the same time that we had this conversation back in 2018, is that equity is not only built in ownership in the sense that your property increases over time based on general market values. It also increases over time in the sense that you're not renting. You're paying a mortgage that's going in. Yes, you're paying off some interest, but you're also paying off principal. And so that's increasing your equity too. It's in concept a bank account in and of itself. And so I don't feel that if we are subsidizing, that we should be providing any sort of extra, I guess, potential outside of the equity that's being built on paying principal and the advantage you're getting from subsidized property, that we should be providing some sort of exit strategy outside of holding the property for a certain amount of time. So I'm okay with the 10-year, does 10 years feel right? Yes, 10 years feels right. Rolling the 10 years, that's generally okay to me. And then does the single 10-year term for a lower waiver seem reasonable? That's where I'm getting a little bit questionable.
Would it be helpful if we talked what a fee waiver at a lower percentage might be?
I'm just saying, when we're utilizing taxpayer dollars to subsidize properties, I would like them to see 10 years and 10 years only. Well, not 10 years only, but 10 years plus, 10 years plus. And so yes, I'm against a buyout option. I'm against, does it seem reasonable? I'm sure the staff does a really good job. And so yes, it seems reasonable. Do I agree with it on principle? And the answer is no. So thank you.
Councilor Hidalgo Ferring.
Thank you, Mayor. So, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for articulating. I didn't quite know how to articulate what I was thinking as far as, I just knew that I did not like the buyout option. I was trying to find the words to articulate why, and I mean, it really comes to the point that we are putting into this fund, our taxpayer dollar is working towards providing these housing. So I did not feel good with the buyout option. I think that 10 years, I like the idea of, that rolling 10-year lifespan, if I understood it correctly, just the next person who buys, it starts all over again. I am good with that. I trust you, and I trust, you guys are the experts. And, you've taken what we've conveyed in idea and how you were able to pull it together in something that can be accomplished to meet the needs of our working class residents who'd like to be able to purchase. And, yeah, I think that's, I have more questions, but I think I want to hear the rest of the presentation first. But I think as far as answering these questions, if you got what you need for this page, I can stop here.
Okay.
Councilor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Well, I like the first part that others had commented on, but I'd like you to go back to the buyout option so that we can kind of show that to the folks out there. Because you said, if I heard you correctly, Molly, that the whole purpose of that option was to make it sting a little bit, to get them to not just make a knee-jerk reaction, hey, we want to move closer to somebody, in another town or something like that. We want them to think about, why they would move for things like changing of jobs, better opportunities and things like that, and personal financial hardship as well as personal hardships. Can you give me a little bit of the flavor of your conversation of your group in regards to why you came to the 25%?
Sure. So first, the idea about the flexibility to move, it really was trying to make sure that the amount of repayment was high enough where it helped people that needed to, but didn't necessarily make everyone think, well, I don't need to do 10 years, I'll just do 7 and I'll be good with it. It's really trying to keep the home in the program unless it's necessary. So the 25% repayment, we tested a lot of different numbers on this. And so if we're walking through that example, if you bought the home under the program for $450,000, the amount of fee waived on that is a 30% fee waiver is about $12,000. And then the loan balance after 7 years of payments is about $400,000. So let's say they were able to sell it at market at $550,000. That's just after 7 years worth of market growth. The net proceeds would be $136,000 after payment of closing fees and realtor fees, et cetera. And so 25% of that, being $34,000, that would come back to the Attainable Housing Fund and be reinvested into the program, means you could still walk away with $102,000. It's not your full $136,000 if you stayed in the program to the 10-year mark, but you could get out if you needed to and could still walk with equity.
And would the house go back into the inventory theoretically?
Let me think through that. No, it would not, because you're selling at market rate there.
Okay.
So that would be lost to the program.
Making sure people understood that, and so that's that's the part that I think people are having a little bit of an issue on. But we do understand that people have these things happen in their lives, and we want to somehow be sensitive to that as well. So, thank you.
There's a few iterations on this that we also talked about and everything started getting pretty convoluted. So one of the things you can do is to say, outside of a personal financial hardship or times of economic crisis, you could say the buyout provision could only occur at year 7. So you're pushing it later. The other things that council could do is you could raise the percentage if you were interested in the buyout from 25 to 30, 35%. There's different approaches on this. This was really just taking what we've learned in previous programs and knowing that there are just times where people get in a jam. Now, in the affordable housing ordinance, you all do have the ability to waive it, but those have to go to council to waive on the buyout. And that could be a similar provision that we could bring into this that really focuses on that as well. But, it's really what we were trying to figure out is how do you deal with these unforeseen circumstances that do come up with people.
Councilor Yarborough.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have 2 questions. Will the homeowner be able to lease their property?
No.
Okay. Will there be a homeowners association fees on this property, on these units?
So that's not specified in this program. I think that's on a case-by-case basis. We don't have a restriction on that as part of this program.
I think it depends on the type of development and what it's going to look like. So generally, if you have attached product, you do have a homeowner association because they take on the insurance for the exterior of the structures and other things like that in an attached product. Also, depending on the way it's laid out, you will probably need some type of homeowner association for maintenance of the common areas within the development. So, yeah, I would assume that in most cases there will be some type of homeowners association that will have to deal with either the common green spaces in the property and or the maintenance and exterior of attached product.
And will you all be able to restrict or make sure you monitor or regulate how much that will be and how much the increases are? Because I don't own a home yet, but when I look at places, that determine where I want to move to, because if my mortgage rate is, say, $2,800 a month and my homeowners association fee is $400 a month, that's not affordable for me, and especially if they increase. So that's something, I guess, maybe we'll talk about that later, or that's on down the line, but that's still in the back of my mind as a potential homeowner.
So we do build in, the maximum sales prices do include the average cost of HOA fees in that affordable payment. So that is built in there. It doesn't necessarily restrict an HOA in any way through this program. I think that would be through other city.
Yeah, I mean, one solution on that is, I mean, we probably, and this is more on those that are 45% and above, because that is a development agreement that we have to come into play with. So we probably could look at negotiating language that says, the HOA fees have to be based on the actual cost of maintenance and insurance and everything else. I think part of it where you get into is really when you get into the attached product and they're insuring the external envelope, and that you can't control that cost because that's controlled by the insurance companies on an attached product. And so you could probably say direct cost associated with it or put some framework, but there's outside forces that come in. One of the things that we have seen with HOAs recently is the cost of landscaping has gone up dramatically, and that's really a product of lack of staff and others in the landscaping environment. So we could look at that, but I think it would really be more based on cost of service or cost of insurance and how they look at it. And the other piece you can't control is what the management companies charge in terms of administering the HOA. So everything they do is really predicated on what other people charge.
Well, I totally agree with that, but I also believe and think about the times of economic crisis when that HOA fee is $450 extra a month, that can determine too if someone will be able to continue on to pay their mortgage if at that time. I'm fine with the 10 years, and the rolling 10 years. I myself, I'm not I don't agree with the buyout option within 10 years either. So, so those are my questions that I had, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into that. Oh, can you go to the last slide, the question slide? You did ask, can you talk a little bit, were you going to talk more about the lower waiver?
I think I'm hearing so far that the 10 years feels right, whether it's for the lower or the higher. The rolling 10 years feels right for the higher. I think I would still ask if that single term for the lower waiver seems good, or what other ideas there might be.
And can you just explain that a little bit better for me?
So for the lower threshold of fee waiver, so below 45%, this could be, the average building permit fee, we're using very round numbers, and there's a lot of nuance to what goes into this, but about $40,000. And then let's say a 30% waiver would be applied to a portion of those. So we're saying, what was our calculation? It could be a $12,000 benefit for the developer. In exchange for $12,000, they might opt out of the program if they are expected to do the rolling up to 30 years. And so having a kind of an easier term to swallow to match up with that investment amount was something that we thought might be valuable. So how it would work. Somebody would buy in the program, a developer would sell the home within the program maximum sales limits. Buyer would income qualify, come in, and they could stay there. If they stayed there for 10 years, then they could sell at market rate after 10 years. The house is no longer in the program at that point, and it wouldn't be that rolling situation. So if the buyout was not an option, then there is not necessarily that off-ramp there. It's more of a 10 years. We might have to work through that a little bit. Without the buyout option, does the single term work? Or it's just a flat 10 years.
Okay.
I do want to explain, we've kind of been moving around 10 years, and we kind of touched on it, and so why 10, not 15? One of the things that Molly touched on in this is when we look at the cost of housing and what we've learned in talking to lenders and other individuals in it is, I think a lot of times people talk about what's the margin on a project. The margin on a project, there's different fingers that touch it, but at the end of the day, the lenders actually play a really big role in setting what the margin needs to be, and it's based on risk. And so what we were seeing is that the more risk on actually selling a house, especially in the attainable category, that's different than the affordable category, where we're seeing different issues. If someone can buy a house in the same price point without a deed restriction, but it's 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes down the road, there's a decision-making process that people will make. And so, what we're hearing is that the lenders get concerned that people won't necessarily buy the homes in this category because of the deed restriction. And so the homes end up setting longer potentially and not selling, which then they're going to require more of a margin, a profit margin, so they can ensure that you're paying back the construction loan on this. And I think that's the biggest difference on the attainable side versus the affordable side, is that I think people are used to that in the affordable category, but in the attainable category, it's a new concept. And so that's why 10 years is something from a staff perspective we landed on versus 15, is because of that piece with the lending market.
So I guess it's my turn to weigh in. We used to have an inclusionary zoning ordinance in Longmont, and then when it went away, everything went to market price, and we lost our inventory. So I would like, if we are investing in this, for people to keep these deed restricted, because we'll just have to start all over again if we lose it, to get some affordable housing in. I don't have a problem with the buyout option as long as the next buyer is deed restricted, as long as that home is deed restricted. I do think that they need to pay back some of the cost, the percentage of the fees waived, if not all of them. But I do have a question. Instead of selling at market value when they pull out early, is there a possibility of restricting the percentage that they could sell it for example, 5% under market or 10% under market value? Have you thought about that, and is that a concept that is worth looking at? If someone wants to sell it after 3 years for an unintended consequence in their family or life situation, instead of having the waiver paid back as a percentage, is it possible to have the sale of the home a percentage under market value and forget the buyout part?
So we went through the process of creating the maximum sales price limits that are very well informed by market rates and interest and the general economic climate. And so we were trying to rely on that as much as possible rather than using a percentage, because different markets have different qualities to them. And interest rates in this case are the main driver today. So I think that in terms of saying that we would allow them to sell at a percentage of market price might not allow for as much let me rephrase. It might not allow us to follow the market as closely and build these price points to be truly affordable for those income ranges. It's a very complex calculation that we have, and we have that on a rolling annual basis right now, and it would be advantageous to use that since it is so fine-tuned for the market.
I think anyone could sell as long as you sell in the same AMI range that you purchased the home. So if you purchased the home for $450,000, regardless of where you set, if you sell it to someone who income qualifies in that section, you're fine, because that's the intent, is to keep it attainable there. At the same time, you could sell it to someone lower based on the amount of time and your equity that you put in and what you paid down. You would still make something, but maybe not as much. So as long as you're selling it to someone in the same category or lower, that's fine. I think what I'm also hearing from council on this single term option is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what I hear you all saying is that you like the 10 years and you like the 10-year rolling. Mm-hmm. Would it make more sense for council if you just had 10-year rolling on everything?
I would like that. And we'll go back around. Yeah. So that's a good point. But I do have a couple of other things. I asked everything I wanted to. I had it on my list. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Yeah, I was already red. I've been sitting here red. Okay, so the first thing is, on your list of hardships, change in family status, job change, and then you've got times of economic crisis. One of these things is not like the other. So you've got 3 individual hardships there, and then you've got an economic crisis is a structural crisis like we had in 2008, 9, 10, where a whole community was trapped in their mortgages or trapped by their mortgages. So my question, since we've got a lot of people who, a lot of council members who are uncomfortable with the buyout, if we encountered a time of economic crisis, would it be possible, in terms of the rules we operate by, to add a crisis buyout to this statute because we needed one? And I don't know legally whether that is the case.
It's an ordinance, and the council could change an ordinance,
Right.
anytime. So if council felt like we were in another 08, council could say, we could add something, to deal with it during a defined period, but that would be up to the sitting council at the time.
Right, yes, and I'd be happy with that because, I would like to be able to trust the future councils, at least on something as fundamental as this. So, if we're uncomfortable with having a buyout now under current market conditions, we could do it, play it straight, and then, it could be remedied if a need arose for a blanket buyout program. And that would avoid having a whole class of home buyers get trapped. So I guess that's my suggestion, is that because that's true, we could not do the buyout option to begin. And yeah, so I think other than that, I'd say the first 3 steps in the plan sound good, and the policy questions would be all except the buyout option, would be my response.
Looks like legal wants to weigh in on this.
Just to add a little bit, so these will be individual deed restrictions that will be on the houses. I have seen communities dealing with a problem like you're describing, in which they set up a program that says, if you're in this and you'd like to amend to the new deed restriction that we put out, you can come to us and we'll mutually execute an amendment to the deed restriction. So it might be a little bit more logistically challenging than just changing the ordinance. It might be amendments to individual deed restrictions in the future, but it's possible.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Okay, so what you're saying is that we couldn't amend the deed restrictions by era or under this statute. We would have to have people apply for it one at a time? I don't understand exactly what you said.
I think there's another option in the event that something develops and how we could handle it, where we could amend the deed restrictions and handle it differently, is what I heard you say.
The communities I've seen do it before have had done it on an individual basis. They put out, hey, if this is something you're experiencing and you'd like to change into this new deed restriction that we've drafted, come to us and we'll work together to get that changed.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely certain if you could do it on a global rubber stamp.
Well, the reason that I asked the question that way is because these individual one at a time decisions sounded like a tremendous administrative burden, especially since they all go up to the council, each and every one. It's like airport hangar leases or something. There's just way too many of them. Only these are complicated instead of simple. So, I'd sure like to know more about that before leaving it out. So maybe, the direction would be, well, proceed, but let's learn more about what can be done about that.
I think, again, council can change ordinances. And if there is a situation, council could change the ordinance. That's one solution. I think this is another solution. There are different ways to handle it should a crisis like 08 occur again.
You already turned me on. You also have Shakita on too. But,
After you.
well, yes, exactly. Thank you, Mayor Peck. This is actually in response to Councilmember Yarbrough, because she was asking questions about HOAs. And so I thought it'd be pertinent to bring up a couple questions as well to hopefully clarify also for Councilmember Yarbrough that, first of all, are HOAs currently regulated by the state? And so there's preemption there, if I understand correctly. And while the governor and possibly some members of the state the legislature for the state of Colorado would like to change
how HOAs are regulated. At this time, the city has no control over how that's done, outside of the fact that they cannot liberalize any items of state code, or I mean city code. So they can't. They can be more restrictive than the city code. They can't be more liberal than the city code. Is that correct? As in, the city won't allow it, but they can allow it. That's my point. As in,
So I'll jump in. So often when the state takes over an area and legislates in that area as a matter of statewide concern, sometimes they allow what you're describing, where the city can legislate in a more restrictive manner, but can't get less restrictive than what the state has done. I'm going to guess that no one in the city attorney's office has looked at HOAs and our ability to legislate in that area specifically.
okay, that may not be my understanding, but fair enough. And the point being is that I think most folks that follow state legislature concepts know that the governor's trying to, I guess, loosen HOA restrictions to allow for the cities to do a little bit more. The other point that I was trying to make also with this is that some of the requirements for new development by the city through land development codes pretty much requires an HOA to be formed. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think when you look at open space and the open space requirements, and somebody has to maintain that. When you look at under drain systems and things like that, someone has to maintain it. That was the point that I was trying to make, is there are things that have to be managed. It gets more complicated when you have attached products, because now there's another layer that you have to deal with in terms of the insurance and other things that come into the attached products, specifically the roof and things like that.
Sure.
I think to your point that you made earlier, I think what I was trying to say is, if we're going to invest in something, you create a contractual obligation that's a little bit different than typical HOA rules, because if you're investing in the development of something, is there a way to contractually obligate how that's going to work? That's something we'll have to look at.
Right, and so also part of the conversation though is our requirement for common space and landscaping that generally falls into the HOA purview. But that's because the city does not want to take ownership of it because of, obviously the costs. And so it's inherently natural that any new development will have to have an HOA one way or another. One thing where, which I've run into with my day job right now, is the excessive burden with the new assessments of metro districts. And hearing about that from owners in metro districts versus HOAs, or seeing how they apply on top of each other. So thank you so much, Councilmember Yarbrough, for those questions, because I think they're absolutely pertinent in talking about the affordability of any sort of housing, whether it's capital A affordable or whether we're talking about attainable housing. So I just wanted to get some clarification on those. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. One question I want to ask, just one, and it may be, sometimes how I am, I come up with crazy stuff. As far as the buyout option, is there a way or an opportunity, or even if it may not even make any sense at all, if, say, for instance, the person who has the lien on the property, and then after 3 years, it could be, they say, I can't do it because of whatever, I have to move, I have to relocate. And then the buyout option could be, say, at 35% after 3 years. Say, for instance, someone stay in until 5 years, then it goes down to 25%. And then if it's the 9th year, can it be 10%?
We certainly looked at scaling it like that. I think we were trying to be flexible without being complicated.
Okay.
But that is certainly an option. And we pulled up some code language that might help inform this buyout option. Under our current affordable homeownership deed restriction, the council may consider, so a homeowner would have to come to council, there is a buyout option there. For exceptional circumstances involving significant disruption to the local economy or an individual financial hardship. So it's more restrictive than what we have. It doesn't include that relocation and family change of status. In exchange, the owner would transfer equity to the city, and that amount is based on the difference between what the affordable price should be and the market price. So we have a buyout option built into the affordable program. It's more restrictive, but that is there. So I just want to make sure everyone was aware of that.
Councilor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. Well, you're asking a couple of questions here, and I like the top three. I agree with Councilmember Martin. Having lived through that and having been on council at the time in 2008 through 10, it was absolutely miserable for people. And I can tell you that people were looking for every opportunity to get out if there was an opportunity to move somewhere and make a better life for their families, even if it had included serious loss and moving across the country. So, I think we should always keep that in mind. I do like what Councilmember Yarborough is bringing up here in regards to kind of a tiered system, in the sense that, you played by the rules, and then all of a sudden at the very end or somewhere in that component there, you can no longer, keep it rolling because of some serious circumstances. I like the idea of being flexible for folks because, the whole idea of getting in here, people are really kind of jumping through that fiery hoop. And so because they really want that home ownership, they're not doing this as a flippant a decision to do, well, this is what I'm going to do today, and tomorrow, well, who knows what I'm going to do, sort of approach. So I don't think people want, I also think about the next generation here and kind of how they've dealt with things and their approach to, work-life balance and other things like that. And so I think we have to, be conscious of that and recognize that there's sometimes things that just are, not going to work. And then the last point there that I heard from Councilmember Rodriguez, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, is it just is one of the things that I've often said is really kind of frustrating, because we set these metro districts and it's even more of an impact on people's decision of whether to support a bond issue or some other thing like that than it is their homeowners association, and it just kind of whacks people in a way that hurts communities. And so that was interesting here, and I appreciate your input on that, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez. So, as you can hear, I'm kind of open to some of these things in regards to the buyout area, if that gives you some direction.
So, I would like the rolling 10-year lifespan option for all of it. I like the buyout option only if the unit or the home is deed restricted after they sell, that it's continually deed restricted, perhaps for 30 years for all of these. I just can't see having to rebuild our inventory because someone sells and then we lose that option to have an affordable unit. But I do like the buyout option. It makes sense, and I would like all of it to be on the 10-year lifespan option. But I do have a question. You had just mentioned, Molly or Harold, what our last deed restriction on the buyout option was, on the affordable housing. Why don't we just adopt that? Or why don't we adopt this? Why are they different, I guess?
I think part of it was just the different circumstances and who's looking at those houses is why we were trying to do something like that and give you some options. You can adopt that. We were actually just talking that Tim could put language in that says, in the event of a situation, council can adopt something by ordinance to deal with it. So we could adopt what we have and then, or adopt what we have and just bring them up individually if we have issues.
And
Go ahead.
the intent here is, on the affordable side, really, we're looking about permanent stability. You're protected from, unanticipated rent increases. You are able to build some, but generational wealth. On this level, it's more of that stepping stone to market, and building that wealth generation as well, just on the different scale.
It seems confusing, to be honest, that staff would have two different options for affordability and deed restricted.
So our idea for implementation is that we already have our affordable deed restriction. We would use that where it makes sense, but build a single deed restriction that incorporates this entire program and the options within it. And then for a project that comes through, if there's something not applicable, you can strike it so that it's tailored down to this specific project. But to try and make implementation simple, have it all built in at the front and then reduce down, rather than tailoring it every time.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Okay, so that was my input. Did you want to make another comment, Mayor Pro Tem? Do you have the direction that you need then? Do you want to sum this up for us, Harold?
Not really.
I didn't think so.
No. So what I hear everyone saying is 10 years feels right. In terms of the large investment, I heard everyone say the 10-year rolling makes sense. When we got into, the smaller, below the 45% fee waiver, you all were starting to move in different areas. Some said that the fixed 10-year was fine. Others were alluding to longer deed restrictions, which has prompted me to throw out, well, if that's what you're saying, does the rolling work? So I think the first two on the large program, I think have been answered by all of you. I think we need to dig into the single 10-year term deed restriction on those that have less than 45% fee waiver. And is that what you all want to see, or do you want to see the rolling, or do you want to see something else?
Molly, do you want to go back to that slide that shows the two options?
We could do the summary one.
I think it's one more, or is this?
This one's got the large and the small summary.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you. I think where I'm struggling here is that we could be talking about a private developer who wants to provide this kind of product with no subsidy from the city, right? And then we could be talking also about a product at the same price point that the city is heavily subsidizing. And so that's where I'm having trouble here, is that if the city is heavily subsidizing something to reach a price point, I think there should be requirements, deed restrictions, things like this. But when we're talking about something that's provided by a private developer with no real city subsidy, and they're providing this because they're getting some sort of other carrot, not a stick, but a carrot, as far as, incentives or something like this, that requiring the same deed restriction, yes, that does not seem necessarily prudent in concept because they're doing it in and of themselves. And so I think that's where I'm having a real disconnect here when we're having this conversation. Because I know hypothetically, because in concept, we're kind of talking hypotheticals here. And so are we just specifically talking about city subsidized attainable housing?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And so in that case, I am still a firm 10-year. I don't really like the buyback concept unless, as previously noted, that with our truly affordable, capital A affordable housing, that we have this concept in there. I would like to just, make that consistent, if you will. So that's where I was getting a little bit confused, I suppose, is that there are private developments not necessarily asking for city subsidies that could be providing this same level. I'm not going to name it, but it's in the air right now because of the county. But so that's where I was going with my comments about talking about deed restrictions and things like that. If the city is providing substantial subsidies, I want deed restrictions. I don't really like the buyback process unless there's extreme circumstances which are already outlined in our affordable housing policy. And so that's where I stand. I'm happy to hear what my fellow council members say.
He said it much better than I did. That's what I was trying to say. Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I think maybe one of the premises that Molly began with that we may be overlooking, except possibly the Mayor Pro Tem, which, his statement partially touched on this, is the idea that this whole program provides a disincentive to producing attainable housing because it squeezes the addressable market for the developer or for the builder, really, of the actual dwelling units. And because of that, it's easier for a large developer to deal with the pushback, to deal with a really long deed restriction than it is for a smaller developer who can't, he can't do things like phase his market and, do other things that improve the way his addressable market behaves. And that is the reason for having a small investor have a simpler deed restriction function that doesn't last as long, so that more people are willing to get into this. And because of that, especially if we agree to leave off the buyback for now, or the buyout for now, I am good with having this two-tier idea of a three-tier deed restriction through three ownerships for large investments, and a shorter one for small investors. So I just thought I would explain that as my reasoning in order to hope that we can get to consensus. So, my proposal for consensus is keep this as it is, except for dropping off the buyout. And, again, with the caveat that we could probably structure the ordinance so that we could put it back later if it was necessary in the future because of market pressure or market crisis.
Councilor Hidalgo Fehring.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to make sure that what we're doing doesn't convolute or make it worse or make it, just impossible for you all to navigate as we're going through these applications. So if there are policies that we have in the affordable housing as in regard to buyout or, emergency situations, unforeseen situations, how much of that could be carried over that we could just kind of cross and have it in both funds? What would be possible to simplify or streamline that process? As well as, and I was rereading the packet and looking, I had marked that I wanted to see this slide again, but I did not mark why I wanted to see it, so I wasn't going to draw attention because I forgot my question. So thank you for popping this back up again. And so looking at the fixed term deed restriction is only applying if they're contributing less, or asking for less of a fee waiver, sorry. And so, I mean, I think that should have a more liberalized policy and less constraint than those who are receiving more of the funds. So, in looking at the 10-year, yes, if they go for a larger investment, fee waiver, then yes, I agree that we should go for the rolling. As far as the buyback component, I want to be empathetic to situations, but if there's just a policy already written in that affordable that can kind of make its way over to cover that attainable, I would be amenable to that.
So,
Can I ask a question?
yes, please.
Who is okay with the fixed term tenure on projects that are requesting less incentive?
Just raise your hand.
Okay. I think that answers the last remaining question. And then no buyout, but we'll incorporate the buyout language from the affordable housing
Yes.
program into this. And then Tim will draft some language that also gives council the ability by ordinance, in the event that there's another 08, that you can adjust by ordinance depending on conditions that are happening right then, but it doesn't require it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
You know,
listening to us.
I will tell you, internally, we struggled in this.
It's difficult.
Internally, we
It's
struggled
tough.
with and said many of the same things that you all were saying. So we were having the same challenge.
And remember, we're charting new territory.
It was a good discussion, though.
So the remaining pieces are rather more straightforward. Okay, on our employer-sponsored unit. So this, last time you saw it, this was a right of first refusal option for city employees to help with staffing and quality of service provision issues that we've been having. Through the stakeholder feedback, we heard that open it up to all employers, of which the city could be one. And so that's how it is structured in this proposal. We also are making sure that we call it a preference rather than a right of first refusal. That is the best way to move forward under fair housing laws. And that would come with a process where you can say, we have preference for employed by this employer, and if there's not out there, then we move down the list. And we need to define that process just to avoid, the large unknowns of what that would look like. So here's our recommendation for discussion regarding employer-sponsored units. Kind of what we just said, the preference option, and then when it comes to the actual implementation of this, if an employer wants to participate in this, and recall that we have this is built into the point system, so we are trying to encourage developers to partner with employers to come together and make this happen. So you could, as an employer, either invest in the development costs up front, in which case you would follow a wait list or a lottery process that the city defines that then they could use for their employees. And then that preference would drop after 60 days on the market. If they can't sell it, the developer does not want to be holding on to those units for so long if you can't fill them with that preference. Or an employer could commit to buy in bulk once constructed, so that means their money's coming in at the end of the process, and at that point, they own them and they are selling them, so they can follow their own lottery process. The city process is off at that point. And then also, the permanence of that restriction could be negotiated with the employer, since there would be some sort of development agreement in that instance. And if they want them permanent, they could do that. If they want it one time for one buyer, they could do that for those ones that they are specifically investing in to serve their employees.
And what shifted in this conversation was there were some comments from people in the meetings that said, well, what if the school wants to put 10 acres of land that they own? They should be able to say, what's the percentage of this to the total cost? Or What if a private employer owns land and wants to do it? So that's what shifted this. And then going back to, this isn't a fee offset. That's the important piece on our utility funds in terms of still having that preference.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Peck. Just curious if this proposed program, I guess, if you will, would be able to extend to, say, a employer wanting to buy current properties on the market and then opt into a program, for instance, saying that, okay, you know, they may not want to invest in a new development, but just buy existing properties on the market and then opt into a program. Is that something that's feasible?
Well, so this is regarding building permit fees.
Right.
So that's how it's structured here. I
Right.
think that would be probably a separate program that we have not yet explored. But
Okay. Well, yeah, I see the permit fees and everything, but some of these other things could play into, say, they could buy a portfolio of homes and say that they are employer-owned homes and that you have to be an employee to live in these homes.
that's the company town model.
Sure.
That's kind of what that is.
I think our involvement on that would be dependent on what kind of fee waivers are they looking for, because they may not look for any,
Right.
depending on the but if, let's say, somebody bought,
Well, they could look for deed restrictions, for instance, but voluntary deed restrictions, obviously, because they'd be the ones purchasing the homes.
or
So-
if there was a condo for sale that someone
Yes.
was building and someone wanted to buy it and maybe negotiate something for reductions, or they were planning to build it, and then they wanted the fee waivers, different ways that you.
Sure.
They would really need something from the city financially, and this is really built on fee waivers versus,
Absolutely.
yeah.
But I could think of an instance where, say, they'd buy an entire, apartment complex, if you will, and then turn that into employee housing, if you will. And so you could see where they could look for possibly waivers, or not fee waivers, but maybe some sort of a tax holiday, if you will. And so I was just wondering if maybe that could be an option that we look at when we talk about employee housing when it comes to that. And so not necessarily, as far as this is concerned, fee waivers, if an employer is going to make a very significant investment, I'd be happy to look at that, and Ed would be in support.
Yeah, I would say, I guess if, let's say, you bought a historical building, that's currently rental market, and you wanted to come in and gut it and then create condos, and they would probably then want to kind of go into this program, because that's where I think the fee waivers would make sense to them. And so I think they could do that in the way it's drafted.
Counselor Hidalgo Faring.
Thank you. So, as I'm looking at how, employer investment, so it's employers then would it be investing into paying fees or?
More partnering with the developer.
Okay, so it's
so they
nothing
would-
that we would kind of navigate or facilitate. It would be contracted between those two parties.
It would, and basically they agree to that earlier in the process so they could gain from those points on the scoring.
Okay, okay, and then, so then, and really, what types of employers would really benefit as far as size-wise? Like more your larger or?
That's what we would expect, but it really is open to any employer.
Okay, okay, and this was gonna be the question I was gonna ask at the last, so that's why I felt like, okay, I'll wait, because I knew you were gonna bring it up. But, so I do like the idea of, that preference instead of first right of refusal, but, giving preference to city employees, to people who already work in Longmont. I do like that, trying to find a way to enhance that. And that's an interesting point that the Mayor Pro Tem brought up. However, I love my teacher peeps, but I do not want to live by them. So, just cautioning on that one. So I'd really like to be able to put our energy in looking at new development and giving options for where residents or where employees who work in Longmont kind of want to purchase. I am very interested in seeing more and finding out how we can make this particular structure work in this program.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. This company town excuse me. Company town model is kind of the inverse of a housing ownership problem that we're seeing nationwide, which is companies buying up lots of real estate and renting them, and this has all sorts, his market distorting in many, many ways. And I've been kind of casting about and asking Harold questions and stuff about what we can legally do to minimize that. And so my question here is, since this does minimize that, right? That if IBM is owning this and they're only going to allow their employees who actually work here to purchase these homes, just like Southmore Park back in the day, then that keeps things from turning into rentals, or tends to keep things from turning into rentals. Is it something that we can do with deed restriction, and I'm thinking about the prior program as well as this one, to make sure that these have to be owner occupied?
Yes, we can.
That's a core provision that as long as the deed, it has to be owner occupied.
Right. So you'd be close to 30 years in the big scale thing before you could ever sell to someone who wanted to use it for rental property.
You could have some as deed restrictions start falling off at the 10-year mark, but I think you're going to have the rolling piece that's going to keep home ownership in there too.
Okay, well, I don't want to prolong this conversation, but when this comes back, I'd like to have a better understanding of how that would work.
Seeing no one else in the queue, I think this is a good discussion. I like the fact that it's going to be a preference, and that the city would only be involved if the city were the employer working with the developer.
Based on the investment
Exactly.
that we're putting in, and then if you have other employers coming in and they're asking for the fee waivers and other things, that's where we start putting in the owner occupied and all of those other components with it.
Okay. Is there anything, are these going to be market rate?
This is
Any of
all-
them?
This is all 80 to 120%
So
AMI.
it's gonna
You
be the
could have,
attainable.
you could theoretically have developments that have market rate and this, but this would only apply to those that
these.
fall in the 80 to 120% AMI.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on this? I think this is a good thing for us to follow up on and continue to
But we're planning to bring the ordinance forward.
Yeah, great.
All
Have a
right,
lot
the
more.
next one is, could be confused with the last one, but this is not about employer-sponsored, where somebody's trying to bring their employees in and invest in exchange. This is just to provide a preference for those that are employed in Longmont, or, and this is based off of stakeholder input, relocating to Longmont for a job. That was one of the Economic Development Partnership's main comments there. Preference process, again, needs to be defined, same thing, and then fair housing really kicks in on this one. Because if an employer is investing, then they have a much greater realm of control over those units. But if it's really a city program and they're open for sale on the market within an income qualified group, we need to be careful with the employment restriction, because we don't want that to inadvertently have age discrimination with retirees or people that are disabled that are not able to work. So there's a fair housing lens on this one that goes through the exceptions to the preference that we have to consider. So the recommendation on this one is similarly to go to a preference. We can have a work eligibility for preference, and these are some of the examples that we've seen in sample deed restrictions, particularly in the mountain communities, and those ways to make sure there's a fair housing lens on it. It would be the same just deed restriction as the general program and the same preference drop at 60 days, and we would have that wait list and lottery process defined, so the developers selling the homes would have to go through that. Any comments on this piece?
I see any comments? No? We like it.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Moving to the right sizing of our existing programs, if this attainable fee waiver program is added to our menu of options. So the existing, we do have a little, I'm sorry, the text is overlapping there a little bit. We have a middle tier option built into the inclusionary housing program currently that's been in place since 2018. And it was a very pretty innovative approach at trying to address the attainable housing problem early, before a lot of people were talking about it. And so right now, as is currently written in code, if you provide attainable housing between 80 and 120% AMI for sale product, you get a reduced IH requirement. And so if we add that on, stack it with a fee waiver, here's a scenario, very broad brushstroke scenario of how that could stack together, and then how that looks next to our affordable incentive program. So what you'll see here is for 100 units, split out with these separate AMI levels, just for a very basic picture. If you're at 120% AMI, by the time you add the fee waiver with the reduced IH requirement, the value of it, the total incentive is 1.5 million. If you're at 110, the total together is 2.5. If you're at 100% AMI, the total together is 4 million. And the problem comes, we're out of balance with the affordable incentive program, because right now we have the affordable fee waiver and the fee offset program, and that comes to 2.8 million. And because there's no IH requirement, they're already affordable, that piece is zero. So we're out of balance here. So talking about the options that we've been exploring, the first basic option is to modify the middle tier incentive, and the second basic option is to remove it. If we modify it on the left side, these are the percent of discount to this is actually the percent of IH required, not the discount. That makes the stacking come out to a pretty even distribution. So that would be modifying from 80% IH required to 90% required for that 110 to 120. Modifying from 40% to 70% required for up to 110. And from 0% required to 55% required for that 100% AMI level. And then at the bottom, what you can see is the total incentive stacking is more evenly distributed. You go from 806,000 at the 120% AMI level and moving it down to make sure that the affordable is the most attractive option. The second option is to remove it altogether, and think of it more that that was a midpoint to getting to a true incentive program with fee waivers. And if so, then you see the distribution at the bottom. The attainable incentives are pretty significantly less than the affordable incentive in this case. So, is there any discussion about what we should do with the middle tier incentive?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much, Mayor Peck. I know that I spent a really long time with Harold, with legal, as well as with housing, a little bit before Molly came on the middle tier thing. And I know that I'm pretty sure there's been almost a 0% take rate on it. Yeah, close to.
10 units.
10
in 4
units.
years.
10 units in 4 years? Is that what you said?
There have been some that have attempted and then pulled out at the last minute.
Okay.
So people have signed middle tier agreements that didn't ultimately end up creating middle tier units.
So as novel as we thought it was, it did not have the take rate that we desired, by a long shot. So, you know, it would hurt my soul to just completely remove it, if you will. My question is, with conversations that staff probably has had, the shortcomings of the program. So does staff truly feel that the modification would bring us more than 10 units and more than maybe a couple of conversations or applications that did not necessarily make it through or pass muster? Does staff truly feel that we would gain more units with the modify?
I would say that the numbers, once you see them together, I mean, 1.6 million is pretty significant. Of course, this is for a larger size, larger scale project. The ones that did consider the mid-tier are not 100 units. I think that those numbers do look, you can't unsee those numbers. They look pretty attractive. It's hard to say, but again, we're trying to affect change how we can. So I would hope that people would give it a shot and hopefully not have to back out at the last minute.
I think it's hard because part of what we were seeing is really to go, I think, why were we not seeing as many units? I think in the last few years, in projects that we've looked at, so when you look at inflation and interest rates, completely changed the financial world in terms of how folks were looking at it. And so, you know, I've talked to council about this before. When you look at the range in housing between 80 and 100% AMI, they're facing the same issues that Capital A affordable housing is dealing with because their margins are pretty narrow. You know, what we were trying to do is not disincentivize affordable housing. I think both of these options do that. If we're trying to get more affordable housing and you look at the numbers that are coming in, when you look at the total incentive, I think Molly's right. It's hard for somebody not to see that impact and want to include affordable housing in it. At the end of the day, they still have the option under this in terms of either building the units or paying cash and fee in lieu to satisfy that requirement as they're looking at the middle tier. I would hope that it would probably encourage them to actually build it on site by just adjusting it upward. But we'll have to monitor that over time and see what's really happening.
Well, I remember saying that to a member of the public when we first passed the IZ ordinance or the IH ordinance, whatever you want to call it, back in 2018. I said, give it a few months, give it a year or so we actually know whether it's affecting the market the way we would like it to. And they told me that was short-sighted. But anyway, I guess I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so I'm going to be in support of modify.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Pack. I sort of feel the same way, that, you know, that it would, we really wrestled over them. So, yeah, I'm with the Mayor Pro Tem. I think that we should err on the side of modify, which is such a big incentive that how could anybody ignore it, and get us these units. And then, because it doesn't have to be forever, you know, we can look at it for another 2 years. So that's where I stand, modify.
Can I have the rest of you weigh in on what you're, Councilor McCoy?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I agree with modifying. I think that we should give it, as they say, the old college try, and try to put a little bit more effort in that and see what happens. It might yield some positive opportunities.
Councilor Hidalgo Fearing.
Thank you. I agree with option one in modifying. And I'm wondering, are there other areas in our, as far as allowable materials for construction to help bring down costs? Are there other ordinances or requirements that we should be looking at as well to kind of boost up, make this more appealing or sustainable?
So we're looking at some of those now. Probably the most significant one that we're looking at, and I know Bob's in here, but Bob, David, and the engineers are really looking at the design requirements for, council's talked to us about a more urban-based code for increasing density, and so looking at that piece as part of what you get if you're building attainable and affordable and really trying to build that density up. So they're working on that. I think we do have some flexibility in terms of materials. That's something that will probably follow along, but I know there's flexibility in that world anyway.
And on the affordable side, we do have height bonus, density bonus. We do have reduced design standards already in effect. And Root Policy Research is going to be giving us a look at that as well here by the end of the year. What we have generally heard, Root didn't do that for us, but we still have them on board. We can always ask for that. Generally, what we've heard is they just, by the time they got down to the end and were fine tuning the pro forma, they just couldn't meet the sales price limits at that time, which is one reason why we went through the effort to update that process as well, to try and fix, if there was something wrong with it, fix that. And of course, that's been in effect now for 1 year, and so we're continuing to track how that has moved the needle. But a lot are also waiting for this to come out, so with all of it, it's all coming together in a puzzle, and we're hoping that altogether they will affect change.
That would be nice too. I mean, we're doing option one. It looks like we're all in agreement with option one. But I think it would be nice to know if anyone does back out, although they're waiting for this and then they back out again. I think it would be nice to know, why did you back out? What would you have liked to have seen? What would have been beneficial for you? Just moving forward, because that's information, if we don't know, that we can look at in the future. So, I mean, for me, I would like to know. I wasn't here in 2018, so all of that you all did sound like it was really good, but for us to only have 4, I mean, how many you said in 4 years? 10 and, yeah. So I would like to know, like, a little bit more information as to why. I mean, just like 3 questions, and that's it, after they back out.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, we're working on a project, and just the impact of interest rates. I was reading Fed chairman comments today and said to be prepared for 7% interest rates. When I start thinking about a project that we're working on and we're knee-deep in the pro forma, that's a pretty significant hit when you look at the impact of interest. And when you look at it, we've talked about this. What are some of the most significant things in play in terms of affordable and attainable? Land cost is probably the biggest. And then when you start looking at the horizontal infrastructure, because you can scale your housing units from a size perspective, but the base infrastructure still is the base infrastructure that you're dealing with. And when you look at the inflationary increases in materials, those are the things we've been challenged with as we're looking at a different project. And a 1% interest hike can change the pro forma in the blink of an eye. And so I'm not sure that's what they were seeing. That's there. The other thing we've been talking about, time's money on this too, because as you're building your pro formas, what we've learned on the affordable housing side is time is probably one of the most significant impacts in terms of when you're dealing with interest rates moving and things like that. So we're looking at a bunch of different options to try to tackle this. I mean, in many ways, it's death by 1,000 cuts in terms of how we're going to have to deal with this overall affordable and attainable housing.
So I'll go with option one as well. You mentioned earlier that one of the biggest costs, or one of the high costs, was landscaping. So along with design standards, perhaps we should bring back those landscaping codes as well and see if we can tweak them.
Yeah, and obviously, when we look at our sustainability plan and the climate action work that we're doing, that's what we're starting to talk about, because those things need to align with each other too.
I do have a question. Do you, in our development codes, do we automatically put in gas lines?
I don't think we're required to, because I know I think that's the developer that has a choice to do that.
So let's bring it back, those codes as well,
Yeah,
because that's expensive and.
no, yeah. It's the developer that has a choice. So we do have neighborhoods in Longmont now that are electric-only neighborhoods. And so, you know, as we're talking about things on the affordable housing side and work that we're doing, we're cognizant of that for a few reasons. Cost is a piece of it. When you're looking at more of a dense urban-based code, and you're looking at your, you know, the different setbacks that you have to deal with when it's gas and water and electricity and these other issues, when you're trying to compress, those are things that we're talking about as well. And so you all will see more in terms of a project we're working on in terms of where those decision points are being made.
So maybe at the beginning of the year, we can address several different things here.
Yeah, but it's a cost. I
It
mean,
definitely is. Okay. Counselor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I just had something to add about that, because we do have a set of milestones for changing those rates in the beneficial electrification plan. So I was kind of hoping, Mayor Peck, that you were suggesting compressing those milestones a little bit, because we're seeing an awful lot of developers that are meeting the milestones ahead of the milestones. Not all of them, but some. And so, yeah, maybe now that we've gotten used to the idea that we could pull those dates in a little bit. I'd love that, but that's neither here nor there for this discussion. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Do you have your direction?
We do on that one.
This
We
was
have
easier.
one left, and it is also more straightforward. The last suggestion that we would like to bring up for discussion today, we know from the work that we've done in the last 2 years on the housing development side and developing these programs and speaking to developers about pro formas and having them share them with us, et cetera, that affordable home ownership is virtually impossible without deep incentive. Habitat has to help fill that gap with donations and sweat equity, and any other developer of affordable housing would virtually have to come and request council approval of 100% fee waiver to make it work at all. And so, in line with trying to make sure that our affordable program is the most attractive option, and because we essentially know that the developments would have to come to you anyway, we were wondering if you would be interested in allowing for administrative approval for 100% fee waiver for affordable home ownership only. We're not talking rentals at this point. And that's the question.
That's a tough one.
For affordable, capital A affordable.
So complete Mike, you need to go back.
Yep.
One. So complete administrative approval on affordable.
Affordable for sale.
Waiver.
Right now, 75% is allowed administratively, so it would just kick it up to 100.
Okay, can we just give a yay or nay?
Okay. Okay. All right, those are all of the key elements of the attainable fee waiver program. So our next step is we're providing this, just summarizing the feedback from our engagement sessions to get that back to those stakeholders. And we're working on an ordinance to bring in October is our plan. And then we would also, we've already started a term, I should say, a form deed restriction just to help us inform the implementation. So we'd be putting that all together to formalize the details.
Okay. Thank you. I think we need to take a 5-minute break.
thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah.
Really, this is the same world we were going through internally, so thank you.
Well, thank you for hanging in there with all of our questions.
looking down and like push the microphone into my mouth.
It looks like it is,
I
yes.
had no
Very
further
subtly,
opportunity.
yeah, very
So,
subtly.
yeah.
Five minutes. Pay changes. Pay.
Ten, nine, eight, seven, six, five, four, three, two, one. Try again. Is it your Teams device settings? What's that? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. Should I switch to the webcam mic? I'll try it. One, two, three, four, five. What are those headphones? One, two, three, four, five. Can you hear me now? You hear me? With a lag. In the headphones, Sandy? Go headphones. Hi, Sandy. No, you can't. Give it a minute to catch up. Okay, so maybe that's an option. Is this possibly an option, Sandy?
Test, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Test, test, test. No.
Are we good to go? Are we done testing? Okay, thank you. We're back in session. Hi, Teresa.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, Teresa Malloy, Budget Manager. So this is the final evening for our 2024 budget presentation, and I don't have a slide presentation for you, simply because most of, well, all of what I wanted to review with you this evening, we have talked to you about in the past. So we have in your packet attachment T highlights all the changes by fund since we first presented the budget. And I want to just quickly go through those changes for you. Last week I mentioned all the pay changes. So those are all reflected on this attachment. We also have the changes in the reduction to the property tax, and that is both in the general fund and then the GID. And then we have some changes to two of the DDA funds. The DDA A&E fund, which is a reduction, it's an increase in the intergovernmental revenue. So that's the transfer from the general fund to the DDA A&E for the holiday lights. We had that included in our proposed budget in the general fund as an expense, but we didn't include it in the DDA A&E fund as a revenue. So we've now adjusted that, and the result of that then, an increase in that revenue means we could decrease the revenue then that comes from the TIF portion of the DDA debt that covers the A&E. So those are the changes, and in total, it is an overall reduction in both revenue and expense. So our total revenue budget across all funds is now $415,467,823. And our revised total budget for expenses is now at $443,954,668. And so that is really the only thing I wanted to review with you this evening. We did advertise for a second public hearing, so you'll need to hold your second public hearing, and then staff will need final direction from you on 4 things, really. Our proposed budget, our proposed CIP, the pay plan, and then our financial policies, so that we can come back starting next week with the ordinances, and then the following week we'll have the resolutions. So with that, unless you have any questions for me, I'll let you hold your second public hearing.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you. This is not technically a question for you, Teresa. This is a question for legal. Can we, in this motion, not obviously to approve potential ordinances, but can we roll a motion to bring back all budget-related ordinances in one motion?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. You can give that broad direction in one motion. Were you pairing it with something else? I wasn't quite.
No, that was my question, was that, because Teresa specified 4 ordinances that need to come forward.
I think you can roll them up as staff
As
direction.
the 4 budget-related ordinances specified.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would just clarify, so it is a combination of ordinances and resolutions. Some of them are resolutions, some of them are ordinances.
Thank you. Thank you. I can wait on that motion then.
So just to yeah, so the ordinances and resolutions can be wrapped up in one motion, or do you want the resolutions separate?
I think since this is not formal final action, just direction to staff, that you
Okay.
can
All right.
stick them all together.
Thank you.
And I think budget was probably planning on bringing those as a package.
Okay. Are there any other questions for staff on this? Did you want to make that motion then?
we need to have the.
Oh, we need public invited to be heard. You do. Okay. Councilor McCoy.
Thank you, Mayor. I had somebody at the farmer's market ask about a budget question, and I just asked Director Marsh about this. If you give just a quick overview, it's about the senior center and what's going on there that this person wanted to know about the budget and how we were handling that, and we had some. It was a very generic question that they had, so you can take it from there.
Sure. Mayor Peck, the City Council, Joni Marsh, City Manager's Office. So I am happy to report, I talked to Ronnie about 2 weeks ago, and so we are fully staffed at the senior center. So our recreation positions that were, had some turnover and were vacant from 2019 forward are currently both filled. And we've made some great headway and progress. And I believe we're fully staffed, and there's also an additional FTE in the budget for 2024. So we do feel that things are certainly staffed appropriately at this point, and we'll keep our fingers crossed on retention.
That's all I wanted to know. I just wanted to make sure that they were happy and that they heard that from somebody that knew the ins and outs of what was going on there.
Seeing no other questions in the queue, I'd like to open the second public hearing on the 2024 budget and final council direction. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address this council? Come on up, Diane Christ.
Thanks for having me back. Diane Christ, Longmont, Colorado. I have just a couple of concerns about the budget that I wanted to mention. One of them came from the September 12th meeting, and it discussed the police old hire pension fund and also the GERP, which is the General Employee Retirement Plan, that the GERP has been not fully funded since 2008, and that also that money had to be transferred to fully fund the police old hire pension fund. And I just want to request maybe that the council make restoring the retirement funds a priority. Also, it would be nice to know from CFO Golden how many years he thinks it might take to restore the retirement fund, just for transparency purpose and also for planning. If you have extra funds, I know you do sometimes have extra revenue throughout the year, you could kind of take proactive steps towards restoring those funds. For transparency and for confidence for employees and for the public, because when it was discussed maybe of raising the percentage of, what do I call it, the percentage that employees add to the fund out of their paycheck, just that little bit, just that little extra percentage, it comes off their bottom line for their paycheck. So it is, a trickle-down thing. It does affect employees and can affect morale. Also, okay, so I'll be brief. There's only one other thing I wanted to mention, and that's a quick plug for my transportation board members who had some concerns that the repairs and replacements to the municipal buildings, in this case was a boiler, HVAC, and flooring replacements, that they fell outside the intended purpose of the street sales tax. I think right now they're in the transportation CIF fund, although I'd have to see a detail on that. And I guess the alternative might be that it would come out of the general fund. So there's just a concern, as the transportation board also gets concerns from constituents about why are the streets not fixed? Why do I have a pothole outside my door? That kind of thing. We want to make sure that all that street sales tax is going for fixing the roads. So that's all I have to say, and thank you very much.
Seeing no one else that would like to, Lance Whitaker, come on up.
Lance Whitaker, 1750 Collier Street. I still worry about the $8 million set aside for street funds also, because like I said, there's going to be an increased strain on the roads due to electric vehicles, whether it be, not having gas tax and the fact that they're a heavier vehicle. So again, I would stress that we need more money for the streets. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Lance. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the second public hearing on the 2024 budget. Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I would move that the city staff brings forward all resolutions and ordinances related to the 2024 budget at the, is it next meeting, the next regular session meeting? Yes. Didn't know based on what's also on that meeting, so yes, on the October 10th meeting.
So, Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez moved that we bring back all the resolutions and it was an ordinance. Yes, ordinances, for the budget next.
They said October 10th.
So that was next week, October 10th? Yes. So at the next,
Mayor, just if I can correct, the resolutions won't come until the second meeting, so that you're
Okay.
acting on everything, final action on the same night. So the ordinances will come next week, and then 2 weeks later, the resolutions will come when the ordinances are on second reading.
I see what he said.
He
Okay.
usually realizes that, but
Mayor Pro Tem, do you want to amend that motion?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I amend my motion to bring all resolutions and ordinances at their due time.
So, doesn't Counselor Hidalgo Faring second that? You're seconding the amendment.
I did too, but
Okay.
I was closer to you.
All right.
but that's fine.
Seconded by Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Let's vote. That passes 6-0 with Counselor Waters absent. Is that the end of your presentation? Oh, my goodness. I expected more. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. So we are now at final call. Public invited to be heard. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address council? Seeing no one, I will close final call. Public invited to be heard. Mayor and council comments. Councilor McCoy.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank Donna Lovato, the now retired ex-director of El Comité, for her years of dedicated service to the El Comité board and community, as well as her dedication to the community of Longmont. So I went to her retirement party yesterday, and I just want to thank her and her staff for all the hard work that she and her staff put in, and they put in every day.
I agree. Thank you. Counselor Hidalgo Faring.
I know yet, it was Monday, so that was just yesterday, right? It felt so long ago. Yeah, so last night I was at the Silver Creek Leadership Academy Expo. So getting the opportunity to meet with our high schoolers and the projects that they're working on and extensions of previous projects that we're working on. And it was amazing. It gives me a lot of hope for our youth, and it kind of reinvigorates, and I think all of us, why we're doing the work we're doing. And, it's really for our future generations of kids. And, I was really impressed. We have one kiddo who is doing on voter engagement among youth, and, just looking at the different ballot measures and the county ballot measures, and just, really doing the research and having just amazing conversations. So I appreciated that, and appreciated the work that Carrie Adams does with the high schoolers. Just phenomenal work, and so I just wanted to highlight that piece, as well as the Electrify Longmont event last Saturday at Longs Peak Middle School. I was there, and I learned a lot. I had a chance to talk with folks from PRPA and Comcast, or not Comcast, Excel, and just it was really informative. So anytime those opportunities come out, I really encourage folks to get out there and see what's happening. Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I'm surprised. I was getting ready to turn my light off because I assumed somebody would have spoken about it already. But I was one of a number of council members, including the mayor, who was at the tea on Sunday at the Callahan House. And it's a beautiful house. I'd like to congratulate the new house manager, who used to be the house manager of the Molly Brown House in Denver. So I'm sure it's in very good hands, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm just very happy that Longmont prioritizes some of the historical preservation that we do, including the Callahan House. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Counselor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. And I would like to remind everybody that this is debate week. There is a debate or a candidate forum tomorrow for the Longmont Area Dems, but they're a 501c3 and they don't endorse candidates. So I hope all of the candidates are participating in that forum. And then on Saturday, all afternoon and much of the evening, there is the Longmont Public Media series of candidate debates. They're holding real debates with, statements and rebuttals for each seat that is open. And I think that's going to be a very interesting event with lots of networking opportunities in between sessions. So I hope everybody will watch those things. 40 people can attend each debate in person at LPM, and it will also be live streamed, and you can watch it afterwards. I don't know what Longmont Area Dems are doing, but I do know that that they have a Zoom link that you can dial into. So get involved.
Councilor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor. Since everybody else, I felt left out. I gotta say something. So over the weekend, Boulders Museum is now hosting Colorful Colorado through the African American perspective, proclaiming Colorado's Black history. It will be, the exhibit is really nice. It's a lot of history, a lot of people I didn't know. I'm not originally from Colorado, but I learned a lot. A lot of information is there, so I do recommend those of you who really don't know that much about African American history in the state of Colorado to go and visit. You'll learn a lot. It will be there, I know for sure, for a year, and I think eventually after there it comes to Longmont Museum. But I just suggest that you all go check it out. Educational, take your kids. Thanks.
All right. I want to give a shout out to our transportation department that they really got on the airport and 17th Street intersection. And thank Councilor Hidalgo Faring for pushing that and making it happen. So thank you. And also to Susan Bartlett, who gave a great presentation at the Electrify Longmont event. And the city was represented well in both areas. So, City Manager, do you have any comments for us?
No comments, Mayor, Council.
City Attorney,
No comments, Mayor?
can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Fourth and fifth.
Yeah, fourth and fifth.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?